Snow was falling over Spokane the morning Ethan came home, an ex-Marine with a limp and a heart full of ghosts. At his side walked Rex, the German shepherd, who had once dragged him out of fire and smoke. Together they stepped into the silence of an old house that remembered everything they tried to forget. But as night fell and the storm deepened, something inside that silence began to stir, testing the bond between a wounded soldier and the only soul who never left him. Watch their story unfold and feel what loyalty truly means. Snow drifted across Spokane in slow, quiet waves. The air held the clean scent of pine and frost, the kind that settled deep into the lungs. Under the pale morning sky, Ethan Caldwell stepped off the bus with a duffel on his shoulder. Beside him walked Rex, his sable black coat dusted with snowflakes, his breath a steady rhythm in the cold. They stood before an old wooden house on a narrow street lined with bare maples. Paint peeled from the siding and the porch sagged slightly under the weight of years. This was the Caldwell home, the place where Ethan and his brother had once raced through summers and listened to their father's stories by the fire. Time had quieted it. Only the wind moved now, whispering through the broken gutter. Ethan's hip ached with every step. The injury never healed after the blast in Helmand. Metal and desert dust had left their mark. He adjusted his stance, leaning slightly to one side, a habit born from pain that had never left. When he reached the porch, he rested his hand on the railing. The wood felt rough, familiar. Rex followed, close tail, low eyes, alert. At 8 years old, he carried himself with the poise of a soldier still on duty. His ears twitched at every sound, the creak of wood, the crack of ice beneath their boots. The leash hung loose, more a symbol than a necessity. He needed no command. He knew his partner's pace, his moods, his silences. Ethan unlocked the door. The hinges groaned as if recognizing him. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Faded photographs lined the walls, a young Marine in uniform, a smiling woman in a garden, 2 boys with baseball gloves and crooked teeth. The memories pressed close, crowding the narrow hallway. He dropped the duffel beside the couch and lowered himself carefully into a chair by the window. Outside, snow kept falling, soft and patient. Rex lay at his feet, chin resting on his paws, amber eyes fixed on the street. His ears flicked once, then stilled. For a long moment, neither moved. Ethan's gaze lingered on the framed photo of his parents above the mantel. His father's steady expression met his own across the years. "We're home," Ethan murmured, voice rough from disuse. Rex's tail brushed the floor once as if answering. The silence of the house carried a strange comfort, yet beneath it ran a current of ache. Something missing, something unfinished. Each scar on Ethan's body told a story of survival, but none spoke of peace. Outside, the light dimmed as clouds thickened over the valley, turning the world into shades of silver and gray. Rex lifted his head, sensing the shift in mood. His eyes met Ethan's, steady and understanding. The bond between them was more than habit. It was trust forged through fire and years of shared danger. In that quiet room, the weight of war still clung to them both. Ethan exhaled slowly and rubbed his hip. The warmth of the house did little against the chill that lived inside him. Beyond the glass, Spokane's winter deepened, and the first hints of dusk crept across the snow. Rex moved closer, resting his head against Ethan's leg. The gesture was simple grounding. Ethan looked down at him and whispered, "At least we made it this far, partner." The wind rose again outside, brushing snow against the window pane. The sound filled the silence, like a memory returning. Somewhere within that quiet, a long night waited, one that would test both man and dog once more. The night stretched long and heavy. The house held its breath as wind pressed against the windows. Ethan lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, his body still but his mind restless. The rhythm of snow against glass felt like distant footsteps, steady and slow. He shut his eyes, trying to find rest, but the dark behind his eyelids was never empty. A flash of light, a roar of heat, the ground giving way. In his dreams, the desert returned. The smell of smoke, the sharp sting of sand in his throat. He saw faces, some clear, some fading, all swallowed by the noise. Then came the sound he could never forget. The short bark of warning from Rex, followed by the explosion that tore the air apart. Ethan jolted awake, his breath ragged. The room was quiet again. Rex stood beside him, ears forward, eyes calm, waiting. The dog had moved without a sound, as he always did. Ethan reached out his trembling hand, brushing the thick fur between Rex's shoulders. The touch steadied him. "Easy," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's just the past talking again." Rex leaned closer, pressing his weight against Ethan's leg. The gesture was wordless comfort. Outside, dawn began to break, a faint glow spilling across the snow. The silence of Spokane was deep, almost sacred, yet it carried the hum of isolation. Ethan rose slowly, pain flaring through his hip. He moved to the kitchen, brewed coffee, and stood by the window as steam rose from the mug. The reflection that looked back at him was worn. A man with silver threads in his hair and lines carved by years of command and loss. He thought about the letter from the Veterans Office still unopened on the counter. They had offered support therapy, even a housing program. He had read enough of it to understand what it meant, pity wrapped in paperwork. He wanted none of it. A Marine didn't ask to be fixed. Rex padded into the room, paused soundless on the old wooden floor. His eyes followed Ethan's movements, calm but watchful, as if guarding him from things unseen. "You remember that blast, don't you?" Ethan said quietly. "You pulled me out before the fire reached us. I still owe you for that." Rex sat beside him, head tilted slightly as if listening to a story he already knew. The morning light caught the scar along Ethan's temple, a pale reminder of that day in Helmand Province. He remembered the roar of the engine, the sandstorm, the sudden silence after the explosion, the moment when Rex dragged him through the dust by his vest strap, refusing to leave. That memory lived inside him, both curse and comfort. It reminded him of survival, but also of the weight it carried. Every day since the quiet had felt louder. Every night the darkness pressed closer. Yet Rex's presence kept the edge from breaking him. Ethan moved through the house, tending to small repairs, the creak in the floorboard, the loose window latch, tasks that gave shape to hours that might otherwise drift into emptiness. Each movement came with effort, but effort was what kept him standing. By late afternoon, the snow eased. The world outside softened into gray and silver once more. Ethan sat near the fireplace, a mug of coffee cooling beside him. Rex stretched across the rug with his head resting on his paws. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was a quiet truce between past and present. As evening shadows deepened, a faint knock echoed from the front door. Rex's ears lifted, his gaze sharp, but calm. Ethan set the cup down, his hand pausing midair. Through the frosted window, a familiar outline stood waiting. Tall, lean, with the posture of a man carrying both worry and hope. Ethan exhaled and whispered, "It's been a long time, Lucas." Ethan opened the door to find Lucas standing on the porch, his breath turning to mist in the cold air. Snow clung to his coat, and his shoulders slumped as if the years had pressed hard against them. For a moment, the two men simply looked at each other, silence bridging the distance that time had stretched too far. "Ethan," Lucas said, his voice carrying both warmth and hesitation. "You look stronger than I expected." Ethan stepped aside. "You look tired." Inside, the warmth of the fireplace wrapped around them. Rex stood by the doorway, tail still, eyes fixed on the visitor. Lucas smiled, a little uneasy, and reached out a hand. "Hey, old boy." Rex's gaze did not soften. He gave a short, low sound, not hostile but certain. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's neck. "Easy, partner. He's family." Lucas's smile faded into something like guilt. He brushed snow from his sleeves and sat near the fire. "Vanessa wanted me to check on you," he began. "She worries. Says you've been on your own too long." Ethan nodded slowly, reading the careful tone. Lucas had always been the gentler of the two, the one who avoided confrontation. Years had left his face thinner, but his eyes still carried a hint of the boy who used to build toy boats in their father's workshop. "She's right about one thing," Lucas continued. "You shouldn't have to handle everything yourself. The hip, the bills, the house. It's a lot." "I manage," Ethan said quietly. His tone was calm but firm. Lucas hesitated. "There's no shame in asking for help." Ethan looked at the fire, the flames shifting like memories he'd rather forget. "Help changes people, Lucas. Makes them owe something." The air between them thickened. Rex shifted his weight, laying his head on Ethan's boot. Lucas sighed. "Vanessa thinks you'd be better off staying with us for a while. The kids would love to have you there. We've got space." Ethan glanced up. "Vanessa thinks that—" "She means well," Lucas said, but his voice lacked conviction. Ethan pictured her from years ago, the sharp smile, the polished words, the way her eyes measured everything in the room before she spoke. Ambitious, composed, and always 3 steps ahead. She had married Lucas for stability, but seemed built for control. Still, Ethan felt the pull of exhaustion. The house echoed with too much silence, and every climb up the stairs sent a dull ache through his hip. He could read Lucas's offer for what it was, part kindness, part burden wrapped in family concern. He stood and poured 2 cups of coffee. "You've always had a way of showing up when things get heavy," Ethan said. "Tell Vanessa I'll think about it." Lucas nodded, relieved. "You'd make the kids happy." Outside, snow began to fall again, faint and steady. When Lucas rose to leave, Rex followed him to the door body, tense eyes never leaving the man's retreating form. A quiet warning lived in that stare, an instinct born of loyalty and unease. Ethan watched from the window as his brother's car pulled away. The trail of red taillights disappeared into the gray street, leaving the world still once more. He rubbed his hip, the dull ache returning, and glanced down at Rex. "You don't trust her," he murmured. "Maybe you're right." The wind pushed against the windows again, steady and cold. Somewhere above, a loose shingle rattled on the roof. Ethan looked up, already deciding that tomorrow he would climb and fix it himself. Morning light spread through the windows, soft and pale against the frost. The snow had stopped, leaving a quiet calm over Spokane. Ethan stood in the kitchen, mug in hand, staring at the ceiling, where the sound of a loose shingle tapped faintly in the wind. The thought of hiring help crossed his mind, but pride brushed it aside. He had fixed worse things before. By noon, the ladder leaned against the side of the house. Ethan tightened his coat and climbed slowly, one hand gripping the rung, the other steadying his bad hip. The wood creaked under his weight. Rex sat below, ears raised, watching each careful step. The dog's low whine carried through the cold air like a warning, but Ethan offered a faint smile. "It's fine, partner. Just a few nails and we're done." The roof felt slick under the melting frost. Ethan moved with the caution of a man used to pain, pausing often to steady himself. Each swing of the hammer sent a pulse through his hip, but he pressed on, driven by habit and stubbornness. The wind picked up, rolling over the rooftops in sharp gusts. Then it happened. His boots slipped. The hammer clattered away, and for an instant he was weightless, the gray sky spinning above him. The fall came fast. One thud, then silence. The world blurred, his breath crushed from his chest. Rex barked once, sharp and fierce. He bounded to Ethan's side, nose pushing against his shoulder, paws scraping the ground. Ethan's eyes fluttered open, a groan escaping him. Pain burst through his hips, sharp and deep. "Easy," he gasped, reaching for the dog. "I'm all right." But the words were only air. Rex circled, barking toward the street, calling for help. Curtains shifted in nearby houses, silhouettes pausing at the windows. No one came out. The quiet neighborhood watched, but stayed behind closed doors. The cold crept through Ethan's coat, the snow seeping into the fabric. By the time the ambulance arrived, Rex refused to leave his side. Even as the medics lifted Ethan onto the stretcher, the dog followed close, his eyes fixed on the man's face. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and metal. The painkillers dulled the edges but left Ethan heavy and numb. A doctor spoke in careful tones, words like surgery complications and insurance limitations swirling together. Ethan stared at the ceiling, the rhythm of the monitor steady but distant. When the door opened again, Lucas stepped inside, his face pale, his eyes full of quiet worry. He stood at the foot of the bed, hands twisting together. "Ethan," he began softly, "the doctor says the recovery will take months. You'll need help. And money." Ethan turned his head, his voice thin. "I can handle it." Lucas hesitated, then continued. "The shop's in trouble, too. If we lose it, Dad's work dies with it. There's a way to fix both problems. If we sell this house, I can save the shop and you'll have care covered." The words hit like a blow. Ethan looked at his brother, the weight of memory pressing down. The nights their father worked late, the laughter echoing through these same walls. The house was more than shelter. It was their last piece of him. He closed his eyes, the ache spreading beyond the wound. "It's all we have left of them," he whispered. "I know," Lucas said, voice trembling. "But maybe it's time to let it go so something else can live." Silence settled between them, broken only by the hum of machines. Ethan's fingers brushed the edge of the blanket, his thoughts drifting to the creak of the stairs, the smell of cedar, the way his mother's laughter used to fill the hall. Finally, he nodded, slow and heavy. "Do what you have to do." Lucas exhaled, part relief, part regret. "I'll take care of everything." When the room emptied again, Ethan lay staring at the ceiling. Rex rested by his bed head against the floor, eyes half open, watching every flicker of his master's breath. Outside the window, snow began to fall again, light and soundless, as if the sky itself mourned the choice made beneath it. The house was quiet when Ethan returned from the hospital. The air inside carried a faint chill, as if the walls already knew what was coming. Boxes stood open across the living room, half filled with memories that could not fit anywhere else. Each step he took echoed through the hollow room, slow and uneven, the cane tapping softly against the floor. Rex followed close, tail low, his eyes tracing every movement. The dog sat by the doorway, watching as Ethan wrapped dishes in old newspapers and stacked photographs in neat bundles. There was no hurry, only a steady rhythm of care, a soldier's discipline applied to the last ritual of letting go. He paused at the mantel, fingers brushing across the framed photo of their parents. Their father in his workshop, his mother smiling beside the garden fence. The smell of cedar still lingered, faintly buried beneath dust and time. Ethan's throat tightened. "They built this with their hands," he murmured, "and now it ends with mine." Rex tilted his head as if he understood. His eyes followed every object Ethan touched. The folded quilts, the books worn from years of reading, the tin box that once held his father's tools. As he packed, memories surfaced like quiet ghosts. He saw himself and Lucas racing down the stairs, their laughter colliding in the hallway. He saw their mother calling them in for dinner, her voice warm and firm. He heard the faint rhythm of his father's hammer from the back shed, steady as a heartbeat. Those sounds lived somewhere deep inside him, even as the house grew empty. Outside, snow began to melt along the gutters, water dripping into small pools by the steps. The season was shifting, but the air still carried winter's edge. Ethan walked slowly to the staircase, hand trailing along the wooden banister worn smooth by decades of touch. He paused halfway up, resting his palm on the rail. "Thank you," he whispered, unsure if he was speaking to the house, the past, or both. Rex stood at the bottom waiting. His tail brushed once against the floor. The sound filled the space like a heartbeat. When everything was packed, Ethan sat on the bare floor beside his duffel. The silence felt heavy but not cruel. It was the kind that follows a final prayer. Lucas arrived in the afternoon with the realtor, his expression careful, almost apologetic. Papers were signed at the kitchen counter where their mother once baked bread. The smell of ink replaced the scent of flour and coffee. Ethan's signature came last. His hand trembled slightly as he pressed the pen down. With each stroke, a chapter closed. When the new owners came to look around, Ethan stood aside. Strangers moved through the rooms talking about walls, paint, and renovations. Their voices were bright, practical, and unaware of what the house had once held. Ethan stepped outside the cold air sharp against his skin. He turned back one last time, eyes tracing the windows where light used to spill across the floor. The door clicked shut behind him. For a moment, the sound hung in the air like a final note of a song that had ended too soon. Rex gave a soft whine and pressed against Ethan's leg. Ethan rested his hand on the dog's head, his voice low. "Come on, partner. Time to go." They walked down the porch steps together, snow crunching beneath their boots and paws. The wind carried the faint smell of cedar from the roof fading into the gray sky. Behind them, the old house stood still, proud even in silence. A single curtain stirred in the window before settling again as if taking its last breath. The drive to Lucas's neighborhood took less than an hour, but it felt longer. Spokane's edges gave way to a stretch of quiet streets lined with polished houses and perfect lawns. The snow here looked untouched, even by wind, the kind of place where everything was in order. Everything except warmth. Lucas's house stood at the corner of the cul-de-sac, wide and white, with black shutters, a neat porch, and a glowing wreath on the door. Ethan stepped out of the truck slowly, his hips stiff, Rex landing beside him with a soft crunch of snow. From the windows, light spilled across the walkway, warm but distant. Lucas opened the door before Ethan could knock. "Come in," he said quickly, his voice edged with relief. "The kids are excited. Vanessa's finishing dinner." Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and baked chicken. The rooms gleamed with the precision of a showroom, everything placed just right, nothing left to chance. Ethan wiped his boots by the door, aware of the silence beneath the sound of children's laughter upstairs. "Uncle Ethan." A small voice broke through the quiet. Sophie came running down the hall, her long hair bouncing as she flung herself into his arms. "You brought—" Rex wagged his tail, lowering his head to let her hug his neck. Behind her, Matthew appeared. Quieter, serious eyes watching with curiosity. He reached out to touch Rex's fur, whispering something about soldiers and bravery. Ethan smiled faintly. "You've grown," he said, his voice softening. From the kitchen doorway, Vanessa appeared. Her posture was straight, her smile perfect. She was dressed in gray, her hair pinned neatly, every line of her face composed. "Ethan," she said, her tone warm but measured. "We're glad you're here. It's been too long." He nodded. "Appreciate the space." Vanessa stepped forward, brushing invisible crumbs from the counter. "It's nothing. Family helps family." The words came smooth, practiced like lines she had rehearsed. Rex stayed close to Ethan's eyes, following her every move. When she glanced down at him, the dog's tail gave a slow, uncertain twitch. Vanessa's smile tightened. "He's well trained," she said, though her tone carried something cooler. "He's a good partner," Ethan replied. Dinner was polite. Sophie talked about school, Matthew about his science fair. Lucas spoke of the workshop he was trying to rebuild. Vanessa filled the silence between them with graceful conversation, easy, effortless, and somehow exhausting. Her laughter came at the right moments, her eyes sharp enough to note every gesture. Ethan ate slowly, feeling the rhythm of the house press around him. It was clean, bright, and somehow hollow. After dinner, Lucas led him to a small den near the front of the house. The room was tidy, the couch folded out into a narrow bed, a single lamp casting a soft glow. "It's not much," Lucas said, his voice apologetic, "just until you're steady again." "It's fine," Ethan answered. He looked around at the framed prints on the walls, abstract shapes, sterile and still. The window faced the street where the snow caught the light from passing cars. It was a nice house, too nice for rest. Rex circled twice before lying near the door, head on his paws, ears half raised. Ethan lowered himself onto the couch, the ache in his hip pulsing faintly. From the hallway came the faint sound of Vanessa's voice, low, smooth, instructing the children to put their toys away before bed. Lucas mumbled something in response, barely audible. Ethan leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Just temporary," he whispered, as if convincing himself. Rex's ear flicked, and he let out a quiet breath through his nose, settling in as if to stand guard. The lamp dimmed. Outside, the snow began again, light and soundless, falling over houses that all looked the same. Days passed quietly in Lucas's house. Ethan woke early, made coffee, and fixed small things that needed attention. The squeak of a cabinet hinge, the loose step on the porch. It was his way of saying thank you without words. The children followed him everywhere. Sophie liked to hand him tools, her laughter bright against the cold air, while Matthew sat cross-legged studying how each screw fit into place. Rex became their shadow. He waited patiently while Sophie braided ribbons through his collar and sat beside Matthew during homework, steady and calm. The children adored him, calling him our soldier dog. In their eyes, he belonged. Vanessa saw it differently. At first, her voice carried its usual polite warmth. "Ethan, you don't have to worry about repairs. Just rest. You've done enough." But soon her tone sharpened beneath the surface of kindness. "Please keep Rex out of the kitchen. I just cleaned the floor." The next day she repeated it, smiling as if it were a friendly reminder. "And maybe he shouldn't sit on the rug. It's delicate." Ethan said little. He moved Rex's bed closer to his couch, his space shrinking with each passing week. He still helped with chores and taught the kids small skills, how to tie knots, how to care for their boots, how to read the sky for weather. But he could feel the distance forming like frost between glass panes. Vanessa's control came quietly, always wrapped in order. She rearranged his things while he was out walking Rex. The few books and framed photos he kept on the side table were moved into boxes, then to the garage. Just to keep the room tidy, she explained, her smile polite. The word tidy began to sound like a boundary. Lucas avoided confrontation. When Ethan mentioned it once, Lucas rubbed the back of his neck and said, "She likes things a certain way. Try not to take it personally." His tone carried the fatigue of a man long used to compromise. Rex sensed the tension before Ethan spoke a word. His movements grew alert. Ears pricked, body stiff when Vanessa entered the room. When she passed by, he watched her with silent precision. Vanessa noticed. "He's protective," she said lightly one evening, though her eyes lingered on the dog too long. Ethan caught the edge in her voice. "He just reads people," he said simply. The remark ended the conversation, but the air between them cooled further. One night after the children had gone to bed, Vanessa appeared in the den doorway. Her hair was tied back, her tone as smooth as ever. "Ethan, you've been here almost a month now," she began. "We're happy to help, but maybe it's time to think about what's next for you. A place of your own, perhaps. You'd be more comfortable." Ethan looked up from the chair. The lamplight traced the lines on his face, the quiet patience in his eyes. "I'll consider it," he said. She nodded, her smile never faltering. "Good, I'll help Lucas look into options." Then she turned and disappeared down the hall, her footsteps fading like the ticking of a clock. Rex shifted from his spot by the door, a low breath leaving his chest. Ethan reached down his fingers, brushing through the dog's fur. "You heard her," he said softly. "Guess we're on borrowed time?" Outside, the neighborhood glowed under streetlights. Rows of perfect houses, identical and distant. Inside, the warmth felt thinner, polite, but cold. Rex rested his head on his paws, eyes open, waiting. Weeks passed and the rhythm of the house shifted. Ethan felt it first at the dinner table. One evening, his chair had been moved closer to the end. The next, the table was already set when he arrived. 4 plates instead of 5. Vanessa smiled when he entered, her tone light. "Oh, I didn't think you'd be hungry. There's soup left on the stove." Ethan nodded, said nothing, and ate alone in the den. The next night was the same. The pattern settled in quietly, polite and deliberate. Rex noticed too. During dinner, he waited by the door, his eyes fixed on Ethan, while the laughter of the family drifted down the hall. Afterwards, Sophie would sneak in with a cookie or a piece of bread, whispering, "Mom forgot to save you some." Ethan always smiled and thanked her, though his voice carried a weight he tried to hide. His world narrowed to small spaces, the den, the porch, the quiet street during morning walks. Lucas grew more distant, spending longer hours at the workshop. When he was home, he spoke softly, eyes tired, avoiding friction. Ethan stopped expecting conversation. At night, when the house fell silent, he sat by the window with Rex lying close. The soft glow from the streetlights painted the room in pale gold and shadow. Outside, snow drifted through the light like ash. Ethan spoke more to Rex than to anyone. "You know," he began one night, voice low, "there was a time I thought I'd never make it out." His gaze stayed on the window, unfocused, helmed. "The convoy hit an IED. I remember the sound first. It wasn't even loud, just deep, like the earth breathing in before it tore open." Rex lifted his head slightly, amber eyes catching the faint light. "You dragged me out that day," Ethan continued. "You kept pulling even when the fire spread. They said I was lucky." He gave a faint laugh, dry and quiet. "Luck. That's what they call it when someone else doesn't come back." The room seemed to shrink around him, the hum of the heater the only sound. His reflection in the glass looked older than he remembered. Gray at the temples, eyes heavy with years that never left the desert. Rex pressed his head against Ethan's knee. The warmth of his weight steadied the man's breathing. "You're the reason I'm still standing, partner," Ethan whispered. "But sometimes I wonder if I left the best parts of me over there." He reached for the photo on the side table. 4 Marines standing under a blinding sun, uniforms. Dusty smiles, small but proud. One of them was gone now. Another had stopped answering calls. The last time Ethan tried to visit the base, the gates felt like a wall between the man he had been and the one he had become. A soft sound broke his thoughts. Sophie's small voice from the hallway. "Uncle Ethan?" She peeked through the door, holding a blanket. "You looked cold." He smiled, a faint lift of his tired eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart." She draped the blanket over his shoulders, her little hands clumsy but gentle. "Good night," she whispered, then turned to go. When the door closed, Ethan looked back at Rex. That kid's got more heart than most adults. Rex gave a slow wag of his tail, a quiet agreement. The night deepened. Outside, the world looked peaceful. White lawns, still trees, silent streets. But inside, Ethan felt the walls closing in. He reached for the light switch, hesitated, and let the lamp burn a little longer. In the glow, Rex lifted his head again, ears tilting toward a faint sound down the hall. A whisper. A phone call carried through the vents. A woman's voice, soft and deliberate. Vanessa's. Ethan listened, the words indistinct, but the tone unmistakable. Something careful. Something planned. He placed a hand on Rex's neck and murmured, "Stay sharp, boy." Morning came gray and slow. The house stirred with quiet order, the sound of clinking dishes, and Vanessa's calm voice moving through the air. Ethan sat in the den, lacing his boots, when she appeared at the doorway with a practiced smile. "I made you tea," she said. "You've been up early these days. I thought something warm might help." Her tone carried the softness of concern, but her eyes studied him like a problem to be solved. Ethan thanked her and took the cup. The liquid was lukewarm. A few hours later, 2 strangers arrived at the door. A man in a gray vest and a woman with a clipboard stood on the porch, both smiling too easily. "Safe Step Living Solutions," the man announced. "We're here for a quick home safety evaluation." Vanessa clapped her hands together lightly. "Wonderful, you're right on time, Ethan. I thought we could have them look around. You've been managing so much pain lately, and I worry about you moving through the house." Ethan froze. Sophie and Matthew watched from the stairs, their eyes wide. He felt the heat crawl up his neck. "You called them." "It's just a precaution," she said smoothly. "They help veterans all the time. They'll suggest ways to make things safer." The man, Mark according to his name tag, extended a hand. "We appreciate your service, sir. This will only take a few minutes." Rex stepped between them, tail, stiff eyes fixed on the stranger, his ears tilted forward, silent but ready. "Beautiful dog," the woman murmured, her tone careful. Trained, Ethan replied, and protective. They began their inspection, measuring doorways, noting rugs, checking stairs. The woman whispered notes onto her clipboard while the man spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. Given the hip injury, falls are a real risk. You might consider railings, non-slip flooring, maybe even, he hesitated, lowering his voice just slightly, to support garments for nighttime accidents. The words hung in the air like static. Ethan's jaw tightened. Sophie's small face turned red with confusion. He doesn't need that, she said, her voice trembling. Vanessa placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Sweetheart, they're just helping. Rex rose to his feet, a low rumble vibrating from his chest. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. The two visitors stepped back instinctively. Ethan laid a hand on Rex's collar. Easy, boy. Mark cleared his throat. We only want what's best. These changes could make life easier for everyone. Ethan's eyes stayed cold. I can take care of myself. Vanessa's smile didn't waver. Ethan, no one doubts that. We just need to be realistic. The children saw you stumble last week. We're all concerned. The comment landed like a slap. Lucas stood near the doorway, hands deep in his pockets, eyes on the floor. He said nothing. Rex positioned himself between Ethan and the visitors, his body low steady. The silence grew thick. Maybe that's enough for today, Ethan said quietly. Mark nodded quickly. Of course. He handed Vanessa a brochure. We'll send our recommendations. Many families find peace of mind through our program. When the door closed, Ethan stood still for a long moment. The sound of their car pulling away faded into the snow-muted street. Vanessa turned to gather dishes from the counter, her movements calm, controlled. You embarrassed them, she said softly without looking at him. They were only trying to help. Ethan didn't answer. He sat down slowly, his hip throbbing, the shame heavier than pain. Sophie peeked from the stairs, tears shining in her eyes. Rex pressed against his leg, warm and solid. Ethan's hand rested on the dog's head, his voice barely above a whisper. They see me as a burden, boy. That's the plan. Rex's tail flicked once, the faintest gesture of defiance. His eyes stayed fixed on the hallway where Vanessa's footsteps disappeared. Outside, snow began to fall again, coating the perfect lawns in white silence. Inside, Ethan felt something shift, the quiet replaced by a slow, burning clarity. The following night settled cold and silent. The wind brushed against the windows, whispering through the cracks of the tidy house. Ethan couldn't sleep. He rose quietly, careful not to wake the children, and made his way down the hallway toward the kitchen. Vanessa had replaced the old rug earlier that day, a long cream runner stretching across the polished floor. Something modern, she'd said, smiling faintly. It looked soft under the lamp's glow, almost too smooth. Ethan's socked foot met the fabric, and the world slipped out from under him. Pain shot through his hip as his body hit the floor hard. The air left his lungs in one sharp gasp. For a moment the house stayed still, the only sound the dull hum of the heater. Then came the bark. Rex exploded from the den nails, scraping the wood as he bounded toward Ethan. He pressed his nose to his master's face, whining, nudging, pawing with desperate precision. The dog's sharp barks tore through the quiet, slicing it open. Ethan groaned, his voice hoarse. Easy, boy. But the rest of the words died in his throat. The pain was deep, raw, pulsing like fire. Doors opened. Footsteps rushed down the hall. Sophie's frightened voice broke through first. Uncle Ethan, Vanessa appeared next, robe tied neatly. Her expression sharp and composed. She took in the scene. The fallen man, the frantic dog, the trembling children, and pressed her lips into a thin line. You see, she said, her tone measured but cold, this is exactly what I warned about. Lucas came last, eyes heavy with sleep confusion clouding his face. What happened? He fell, Vanessa said simply, gesturing toward the rug. Again. He could have broken his neck, or worse, hurt one of us. This can't continue. Ethan tried to push himself up, jaw clenched against pain. I just slipped, he managed, that's all. Vanessa crouched beside the rug, running her hand across it. It's new. I told you to be careful. You're not stable on your feet anymore. The words stung deeper than the bruise forming under his ribs. Sophie knelt beside Rex, her small hand on his back, tears streaking her cheeks. He didn't mean to, she said softly. I know, sweetheart, Vanessa replied with practiced calm. But we have to think about safety. Ethan met Lucas's eyes, searching for something, support, even silence, that meant understanding. But Lucas looked away, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Rex stayed pressed against Ethan, his body trembling, low growls rumbling beneath his breath. The sound was more warning than threat, a promise of protection. Vanessa straightened, smoothing the fabric of her robe. This isn't working, she said firmly. He's not safe here anymore, for himself or for us. Ethan's vision blurred for a moment. He reached for the wall and tried to stand, his breath ragged. I'm fine, he said quietly, though the words came out thin and empty. Lucas stepped forward halfway, then stopped. Maybe we should talk about what comes next, he said softly, avoiding Ethan's eyes. That was all Vanessa needed. Exactly, she said, her tone crisp. We can't keep pretending. He needs proper care, medical care. Somewhere equipped to handle this. The words settled like frost across the room. Sophie hid her face in Rex's fur. Matthew clung to the doorframe, silent. Ethan looked around the polished hall at the perfect walls, the quiet that no longer felt like peace. His body ached, but it was his pride that hurt most. Rex leaned against him, steady and unshaken. Ethan rested his hand on the dog's neck, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath the fur. We'll be all right, partner, he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he believed it anymore. Vanessa exhaled slowly, gathering the children. Come on, it's late. Let's go back to bed. As they disappeared down the hall, the house fell quiet again. Only Lucas lingered, standing in the doorway, guilt shadowing his face. I'll call someone tomorrow, he said quietly. Ethan didn't answer. The words had already done their damage. Rex sat beside him, head high, eyes locked on Lucas as if guarding a line that could never be crossed. Outside, snow began to fall, heavier, soft flakes turning the street into a white blur. Inside, the warmth of the house felt like a cage. The night dragged on in silence. Ethan sat in the den with the lights low, a blanket draped across his shoulders, the weight of pain and humiliation pressing against his chest. Rex lay close, his breathing slow but alert. Every so often, his ears flicked toward the faint sounds coming from deeper in the house, voices that carried through the vents. It was late, far past midnight, when Ethan heard them clearly. Vanessa's tone was low and deliberate, each word smooth, careful. Lucas, you can't avoid this any longer. He's a liability. You saw what happened. The fall was one thing, but next time... Lucas's voice came hesitant, softer. He's my brother. We can't just send him away like that. We're not sending him away, Vanessa replied quickly. We're making sure he's safe. And us too. You know the veterans facility downtown, they'll take him. They handle men like him all the time. He'll get medical care, therapy, even community programs. It's for the best. Ethan froze, his breath shallow. Each word from her lips landed like a hammer against his pride. And his benefits? Lucas asked after a long pause. Vanessa's voice lowered further. They'll need someone to handle his finances. Guardianship, power of attorney, your next of kin. Once he's placed, everything goes through you. We could pay off the workshop debts, save the house rebuild. Lucas said nothing. Ethan could almost picture him, shoulders hunched, hands twisting together. The silence was an answer of its own. Vanessa pressed gently. He'd want to help if he could, you know that. He always carried the weight for this family. Let him do it one last time. Then you can finally breathe again. Ethan's chest tightened. Her words came wrapped in sweetness, but every syllable dripped poison. Lucas began, his voice cracking. I don't know how he'll take it. He won't have a choice, Vanessa said. They'll assess him medically. Once the paperwork's signed, it's done. You can't keep living in guilt, Lucas. This is the only way forward. The air felt colder. Ethan could hear his heartbeat in his ears, heavy and slow. He leaned back against the couch, jaw clenched, his hand gripping the fabric until his knuckles turned white. Rex lifted his head, sensing the tension, eyes narrowing toward the hallway. The fur along his neck bristled. Ethan reached down, laying a steady hand on him. "Quiet," he whispered. "We'll need our strength." Through the vent, Lucas sighed, a sound that held defeat more than resolve. "I'll think about it." Vanessa's tone softened, a blade wrapped in silk. "That's all I ask." Footsteps followed, fading into the distance. The house settled again into silence. Ethan sat motionless for a long time. The glow from the streetlight slipped through the blinds, casting faint lines across his face. Every muscle in his body tightened with the weight of betrayal. Rex pressed his head against Ethan's knee as if to anchor him back to the present. His amber eyes searched his master's face, calm but alert. Ethan exhaled, the breath shaky. "They want to put us away, boy," he murmured. "Lock me in a place and take what's left. I thought war ended years ago. Guess I was wrong." Rex shifted closer, his warmth steady, his silence the only comfort Ethan trusted. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the world pale and still. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that listens. Ethan's mind began to turn, not in panic but in calculation. By morning, he would have a plan. The hours after that conversation felt endless. Ethan sat awake through the night, staring at the dark window where the snow reflected faint streaks of moonlight. The betrayal ran deep, not loud or sudden, but slow, the kind that burned quietly in the chest. He had faced enemies before, but never behind a family wall. Rex lay near his feet, half awake, his breath even. Every now and then his eyes lifted to meet Ethan's, as if to ask for direction. Ethan reached down, brushing his hand over the thick fur. "We've been through worse," he whispered. "We'll survive this too." By dawn, the house was still. Vanessa's perfect order lay undisturbed, everything clean, still, and cold. Ethan stood slowly, pain tightening in his hip, but focus sharpening in his mind. There was no rage left, only clarity. If they wanted to take his freedom, he would leave before they could. He sat at the small desk by the window, pulled out a piece of paper from his duffel, and began to write. His handwriting was slow, uneven, each word carrying weight. "Sophie Matthew, you made this house bearable. You reminded me what kindness looks like. When you read this, I'll already be gone. I'm not running from you, I'm giving you peace. You deserve laughter without whispers in the next room. I'll carry you both with me always." He folded the letter carefully and slipped it inside Sophie's favorite book, the one with torn corners and a drawing of a dog on the cover. He placed it back on the shelf between storybooks and picture frames of a family he no longer belonged to. The morning light crept through the blinds. Ethan moved quietly, gathering what little he owned. The old watch from his father, a pocket knife, 2 sets of clothes, and the photo of his unit from Afghanistan. He placed everything neatly in his duffel. He waited until the house fell into its afternoon rhythm. Vanessa at her computer, Lucas gone to the workshop, the children at school. Then he moved with purpose. At the edge of town, a small pawn shop stood between a laundromat and a closed cafe. The sign flickered half-lit. Inside the owner, Arthur Briggs, looked up from behind the counter. A heavy man with kind eyes, he nodded in recognition. "Marine right," he said. Ethan managed a faint smile. "Used to be." Briggs didn't ask questions when Ethan placed the watch and a few tools on the counter. He counted out the cash slowly and slid it across. "Take care of yourself," he said quietly. "Always do," Ethan replied. Outside, the sky had turned gray again, the air carrying a faint scent of snow. Ethan stopped by a small market, buying protein bars, bottled water, and medicine. He packed them neatly into the duffel, every movement deliberate. When he returned home, Rex met him at the back door, tail low, eyes steady. Ethan crouched down, pain pulling at his side, and whispered, "We move soon," quiet like the old days. Rex's ears twitched. He seemed to understand. That night, Ethan hid the duffel beneath the pull-out couch, checking the window latch and the side door hinges. He oiled them gently, testing for sound. Not a creak remained. The house glowed softly under the porch light, calm and still, unaware of the storm forming inside it. Ethan sat on the couch beside Rex, running a hand through the dog's fur. "One more night," he murmured. "Then we're free." Rex rested his head on Ethan's lap, eyes half closed but alert. They sat in silence, listening to the faint hum of the heater and the ticking clock on the wall. Upstairs, a door opened. Vanessa's soft footsteps moving across the hall. The sound lingered, too deliberate, too careful. Ethan's eyes met Rex's. "Stay sharp," he whispered again. The clock struck midnight. Somewhere beyond the walls, a decision waited to be tested. The night air was still when Ethan rose from the couch. The clock read a few minutes past 1. The house slept, wrapped in the kind of quiet that demanded caution. He moved carefully, his steps soundless on the polished floor. Rex followed close, body low, muscles tense. The duffel was ready, water, food, medicine, and the faint hope of freedom. Ethan slipped the strap over his shoulder and turned toward the side door. The hinges gave no sound. His preparation had worked. For the first time in months, he felt control returning, fragile but real. Then came a voice. Ethan, Vanessa's figure, stood at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a silk robe, her face half shadowed by the dim light. "What are you doing?" Her tone was calm. Too calm. Ethan froze. "Leaving," he said simply. "I've worn out my stay." Her eyes narrowed. "With the children asleep upstairs, you think that looks innocent?" She descended a few steps, voice rising. "Lucas." Her call sliced through the house like a siren. Doors opened. Footsteps followed. Lucas appeared at the landing, confusion etched across his face. "What's happening?" Vanessa turned to him, breath quick but words sharp. "He's taking things, sneaking out like a thief." "I woke up to check on the kids. What if he meant to take them? What if he's unstable?" Ethan stood still, the accusation settling like ice in his veins. Rex stepped forward, body stiff, head lowered in defense. The growl that left his throat was low but steady, a warning, not a threat. "Vanessa," Ethan said quietly, "you know that's a lie." She ignored him. "Lucas, look at him. He's been talking to himself at night, wandering the house. The children told me he's been planning things. He's not well." Lucas looked from his wife to his brother. For a long moment he said nothing. Ethan could see the hesitation in his eyes, the war between loyalty and fear. Sophie's voice broke the tension. "Mom, stop." She stood at the edge of the hallway, her small hands gripping the banister. "He wasn't doing anything wrong. He said goodbye earlier." "You're lying." The words hit harder than any accusation. Vanessa turned, startled, her composure cracking. "Go back to bed, Sophie." The girl shook her head, tears in her voice. "You always say things that hurt him." Ethan looked up at his niece, his voice soft but steady. "It's all right, sweetheart. Go back inside. Take care of your brother." Lucas stared at Ethan, the truth finally reaching him. His mouth opened, then closed again. Shame crept across his face. Ethan's expression held no anger, only weariness. "If you're still my brother," he said, "then protect your children. Don't let them grow up learning to fear honesty." He turned to the door, every movement slow but sure. Vanessa stepped forward, but Rex moved first, planting himself between her and Ethan. His amber eyes gleamed under the hall light, his stance immovable. The air grew thick, each heartbeat louder than the next. "Stay back," Ethan said quietly, his voice carrying authority that made even Vanessa hesitate. Lucas reached out. "Ethan, take care of them." Ethan interrupted, his tone softened, but the words carried finality. "That's all I ask." The door opened to the bitter cold. Snow drifted in, settling on the polished floor. Ethan stepped out into the night, Rex close at his side. The wind caught his coat, pushing against him, as if testing his resolve. Behind him, Sophie sobbed quietly. Vanessa stood frozen anger, fighting with disbelief. Lucas remained still, the truth heavy on his shoulders. The street stretched before Ethan, long, white, endless. Rex walked beside him, head-high steps measured. They moved through the snow like two shadows seeking light. For the first time in months, the air felt clean, sharp, alive. "Come on, partner," Ethan murmured. "We're done being prisoners." Rex pressed closer, his breath visible in the cold. Together they disappeared into the falling snow, leaving behind a house full of silence and lies. Far ahead beyond the quiet streets, the faint hum of the city called like a promise. The wind cut through the night like a blade. Snow swirled in slow spirals under the streetlights, falling thicker with every gust. Ethan tightened the strap of the duffel across his shoulder and kept walking. Each step sent a dull ache through his hip, a pulse that climbed up his spine. The cold bit through his gloves, turning his fingers numb, but stopping wasn't an option. Rex stayed close, his dark coat flecked with white, his breath steady clouds in the freezing air. Every few steps he glanced up at Ethan as if to ask if he was still all right. Ethan gave a small nod, each time silent communication forged through years of survival. The neighborhood faded behind them, the lights of Lucas's house swallowed by snow. Ahead stretched the long road into Spokane, 4 miles to the terminal, 4 miles to freedom. Ethan leaned slightly to one side, his limp sharper now. The world had narrowed to breath cold, and the sound of boots pressing into snow. Rex brushed against his leg every few steps, keeping pace steady as a heartbeat. Halfway down the empty road, the memories came. The desert heat, the thunder of helicopters, the dust that stung his eyes. He could almost taste it again. He remembered the convoy that day in Helmand, the sharp crack of the explosion, the sudden silence that followed. The sand had burned beneath him, his body heavy and useless. Then Rex appeared through the smoke muzzle, bleeding, pulling at his vest, refusing to leave him behind. The image blended with the present, the dog now beside him, guiding him through another kind of battlefield. Snow, not sand. Silence, not gunfire. But the fight was the same. Survive 1 more mile. Ethan whispered, "Still saving me, huh?" His voice cracked in the cold. Rex's ear twitched, and he pressed closer, steadying his master as they crossed another patch of ice. The road curved toward the city. Spokane's skyline shimmered faintly through the storm, distant and ghostly. The pain in Ethan's hip grew sharper, each step a test of will. He stopped once, leaning against a lamppost, his breath ragged. The snow gathered in his hair, melting into thin rivulets down his face. Rex circled back, nudging him forward with a gentle push of his head. Ethan smiled faintly. All right, lead the way." They moved again, slower now, but with purpose. The hum of a passing car echoed briefly, headlights cutting through the storm before vanishing into darkness. The world felt both endless and small. A single man, a loyal dog, and the path between them and whatever waited next. The city sounds grew clearer. A bus horn, the faint hiss of brakes, the shuffle of late-night travelers. When the first neon glow broke through the snow, Ethan exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. There it was, the Spokane terminal. The lights flickered weakly through the storm, pale and distant, like a lighthouse in fog. Ethan paused, resting his weight on one knee. His vision blurred for a moment from exhaustion. Rex stood in front of him, eyes fixed on the glow-ahead, tail still, body alert. The wind whipped around them, but for the first time all night it felt bearable. Ethan reached out, resting his hand on Rex's shoulder. "Almost there, partner. Just a little more." Together they walked the final stretch, footprints swallowed by the snow behind them. The terminal doors loomed closer. Glass fogged from the heat inside, glowing with a faint amber light. Ethan's breath came in shallow bursts as he stepped beneath the awning. The storm quieted around them. He looked down at Rex, whose sides rose and fell with the rhythm of loyal exhaustion. The fight for escape had ended. What came next would decide if it had been worth it. The Spokane terminal glowed dimly against the snow. Inside, the warmth hit Ethan like a wave. He stumbled toward a row of benches near the far wall, the duffel heavy against his shoulder. Rex followed, but faltered halfway, his legs trembling from exhaustion. Ethan dropped to one knee beside him, his breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. "You did good, boy," he murmured, brushing snow from Rex's coat. "You did real good." Rex lowered himself onto the floor, head resting on Ethan's boot. His eyes stayed half open, calm but weary. Around them, the few travelers spoke in hushed tones, their footsteps echoing through the nearly empty hall. A vending machine hummed softly nearby. The world felt distant, muffled, as if holding its breath. Ethan leaned back against the wall, his body shaking. The pain in his hip throbbed with each heartbeat. He tried to focus on the sound of Rex's breathing, steady and familiar. Outside, the wind rattled the doors, but inside, time seemed to slow. A low voice broke the quiet. "You look like you've been through hell, Marine." Ethan blinked, lifting his head. Sitting across the aisle was a broad-shouldered man in a worn jacket, gray at the beard and hairline, eyes sharp and tired but not unkind. A trucker's cap rested on his knee. Ethan managed a faint smile. "You're not far off." The man nodded. "Name's Frank Doyle. Been driving freight since before my knees gave out." "You Ethan Caldwell," he said. "Served in Afghanistan. Now I just walk." Frank's gaze drifted to Rex. "That's a fine dog. Seen that look before, the kind that doesn't sleep till his man does." Ethan rubbed the back of Rex's neck. "Saved my life more times than I can count." Frank studied them both for a moment, then leaned forward. "I once had a son who walked into the night with no one to help him. He didn't make it far. Since then, I've learned to listen when I see that same look on another man's face." Ethan met his eyes, the words settling deep. "We're just trying to make it west," he said quietly. "Find somewhere quiet enough to start again." Frank sat back, thoughtful. "I'm heading west myself. Redford, Oregon. Small lumber town, good people, bad roads. I could use company. And you?" He glanced at Ethan's limp, then at Rex. "You could use a ride." Ethan hesitated. Pride was hard to silence, even after everything. But Rex lifted his head, ears tilting as if waiting for an answer. Frank noticed the hesitation and added, "No charge. Just two veterans splitting the road." Ethan exhaled slowly, the tension easing from his shoulders. "You sure about that?" Frank's eyes softened. "If I wasn't, I wouldn't have asked." He stood and motioned toward the doors. Trucks out back. Big blue Kenworth. Coffee strong, heater stronger. Ethan rose carefully, his hip protesting. Rex followed, tail low but wagging faintly. They moved toward the exit boots, echoing against the tile. As the doors slid open, cold air rushed in again, sharp and clean. Outside, Frank climbed into the driver's seat and nodded toward the passenger side. "Welcome aboard." Ethan helped Rex onto the cab floor, then pulled himself into the seat. The truck rumbled to life, its engine a low, steady growl. Through the windshield, the lights of Spokane faded into the distance as they rolled out onto the open road. For the first time in months, Ethan felt the weight in his chest begin to lift. The road ahead stretched wide and quiet, the horizon faintly glowing with the promise of dawn. He looked over at Frank and gave a tired but genuine smile. "Guess we're heading west, partner." Frank chuckled, adjusting the mirror. "Redford's not heaven, but it's a start." Rex lay curled between them, his head resting on Ethan's boot once more. The hum of the tires filled the silence, steady and calm. Behind them, the storm disappeared into the rearview mirror. Ahead, the dark gave way to the faintest trace of morning light. The road wound through pine forests and low mountains, the truck humming steady against the wind. Hours passed in quiet companionship. Frank drove with one hand on the wheel, the other wrapped around a dented thermos that smelled faintly of black coffee. Ethan watched the landscape shift, snow thinning into mist trees crowding closer to the road. The first light of dawn stretched through the pines, soft and golden. Rex sat between them, eyes half closed, head lifting every so often at the sound of passing wildlife. His calm presence filled the cab like warmth. By the time they reached Redford, Oregon, the day had settled into a pale gray. The small town appeared out of the forest like something preserved in time. Wooden houses leaned slightly with age, smoke curled from chimneys, and the air carried the faint scent of cedar and rain. Frank slowed the truck as they entered the main street. "Here she is," he said with quiet pride. "Redford. Few hundred folks, one good diner, one bad barber, and peace enough for anyone who wants it." Ethan smiled faintly. "Looks like it never learned how to hurry. That's the best thing about it." They parked beside a red brick building with fogged windows and a neon sign that flickered weakly, Mayfield's Diner. A bell over the door jingled as Frank pushed it open. The warmth inside was immediate smelling of coffee bacon and something sweet baking in the back. Behind the counter stood a tall woman with silver hair and sharp blue eyes. Her apron was dusted with flour, and her stance carried the strength of someone who had weathered storms and kept standing. "Frank Doyle," she said, half smiling. "You've been gone too long." "Dorothy Mayfield," he replied, tipping his cap. "Still running this place like a general runs a base." "Someone has to," she said, wiping her hands. Her gaze shifted to Ethan, then to Rex, waiting politely by the door. "And who's this Ethan Caldwell?" Frank said. "Marine vet. Long road behind him, longer one ahead. And that's Rex, his right hand and left heart." Dorothy studied Ethan a moment longer, her eyes softening. "You look like you could use a meal and a purpose." Ethan hesitated. "A meal, maybe. The rest might take time." Dorothy nodded. "Time's something we've got plenty of. Sit down." As Ethan ate his first warm food in days, the tension in his shoulders eased. The diner was alive with quiet rhythm. The hiss of the stove, the scrape of cups, the soft hum of an old radio in the corner. It felt real in a way city life had forgotten how to be. After a while, Dorothy leaned on the counter. "The roof leaks when it rains and the lights flicker more than they shine. If you've still got some fight left in you, I can trade a week's pay for some repairs." Ethan looked at his hands. Scarred, steady, capable. "I can do that." "And there's a small room upstairs," she added. "Empty since my husband passed. It's warm, quiet, and the dogs welcome." The offer settled over him like the first sunlight after a long winter. "You sure?" he asked. Dorothy smiled, faint but genuine. "I don't make offers I don't mean." Later, when the workday quieted, Ethan sat near the diner's fireplace. Rex lay stretched on the rug, his fur glowing orange in the firelight. For the first time in years, the warmth wasn't borrowed. It belonged to them. Ethan leaned back, closing his eyes. The storm behind him finally felt distant. The smell of cedar and coffee filled the air. "Feels like a start," he murmured. Rex stirred, pressing closer to the fire, his tail tapping once against the floor. The sound was soft, like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. The next morning began with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of rain on the tin roof. The leaks Dorothy had mentioned made soft drips into a metal pan beside the counter. Ethan stood on a stool with a toolbox in hand, replacing worn screws and sealing cracks. His movements were slow but sure, practiced from years of fixing what others left behind. Rex watched from his usual spot by the door, eyes following every motion. Whenever a customer entered, the bell jingled and Rex's tail gave a single quiet wag, as if welcoming them personally. "Smartest employee I've ever had," Dorothy joked from behind the counter. "Doesn't complain, doesn't need a paycheck." Ethan smiled. "He works for chicken scraps." The diner felt different from the polished silence of Spokane. Here everything carried a touch of life. The chatter of locals, the scrape of plates, the hiss of the griddle. The people of Redford came not only for food, but for company. They noticed the new man fixing the lights and the dog waiting patiently by his side. By the end of the first week, the flickering bulbs glowed steady. The roof stopped leaking, and the old stools stood straight again. Dorothy watched Ethan work and said, "You've got hands that remember how to build." Hands that forgot what to hold, he replied softly, but there was no bitterness in his tone, only acceptance. Rex had become the diner's quiet heartbeat. Children from nearby houses stopped in after school just to see him. He would let them tug gently at his ears or lie beside them near the fireplace while their parents drank coffee. His calm presence filled the space with something beyond warmth, something close to peace. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the diner's windows, Ethan sat at a corner table fixing a loose chair leg. A small boy named Tommy approached, holding a cookie. "Can I give it to him?" he asked, pointing to Rex. "Go ahead," Ethan said. Tommy offered it, and Rex took it delicately, tail-brushing the floor once in thanks. The boy grinned and ran back to his mother, who smiled at Ethan from across the room. It was a small moment, but it felt bigger than words. Dorothy joined him later with 2 mugs of coffee. "People are talking," she said. "They say you've brought luck back to this place." Ethan looked at the glowing sign outside, now fully lit after years of flickering. "Maybe it just needed attention," he said. "That's what people need too," Dorothy replied. "Evenings were his favorite." The hum of voices faded as the last customers left, leaving the clatter of dishes and the soft crackle of the fire. Dorothy wiped down the counter while Ethan checked the windows. Rex stretched out near the hearth, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed in contentment. Sometimes Ethan would sit beside him, one hand buried in the dog's fur, letting the warmth soak in. He no longer felt like a guest here. The silence he once feared had turned into comfort, and the loneliness had softened into belonging. When Dorothy locked the door for the night, she paused beside him. "You planning to stay a while?" Ethan glanced at Rex, then back at her. "As long as this roof holds," he said. She smiled. "Then I'll make sure it does." Outside, the snow began again, gentle this time, flakes drifting past the diner's glowing windows. Inside, the light from the fire painted the room gold, and Rex let out a deep, content sigh. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel like a man running. He felt like a man arriving. The snow came heavy that week, falling in thick curtains that turned the forest behind Redford into a quiet white maze. By afternoon, the storm had eased into a soft drift, and Ethan gathered the small group of children for their weekend lesson. They met at the clearing just beyond the pine line, Tommy, Ellie, and 2 others from town, bundled in coats, their laughter fogging the cold air. Rex trotted alongside them, tail-high steps light against the snow. He carried a rope in his mouth, proud as a soldier with a banner. Ethan smiled at the sight. "All right, recruits," he said, kneeling near a fallen log. "Today's mission: learning how to tie a bowline. It's a knot that never slips if you trust it." The children watched closely, fingers clumsy through mittens, while Rex sat beside Ethan, eyes sharp, occasionally pressing his paw onto the rope as if to assist. Their laughter filled the clearing, echoing between the trees. For a moment, the world felt untouched by everything that had come before. Then Rex froze. His head lifted, ears pricking forward, body tensing like a drawn bow. The playful noise faded. Ethan followed his gaze toward the tree line. Between the drifts and shadows, something moved. Slow, deliberate. "Stay close," Ethan said quietly, rising to his feet. From the brush emerged a wolf, thin ribs visible beneath its gray coat, eyes wild and hungry. Its breath came in short, white bursts against the snow. The animal stepped forward, hackles raised its growl deep and low. The children clung to each other, fear silencing them. Before Ethan could move, Rex sprang forward. His bark shattered the stillness, fierce and sharp, echoing through the forest. The wolf lunged, teeth bared, snow exploding beneath them as the two collided. "Rex!" Ethan shouted, stumbling toward the fight. The sound of snarls and snapping jaws filled the air. Fur and snow blurred together, gray and black twisting in violent motion. Rex drove the wolf back, his strength raw, primal, unstoppable. But the wolf was desperate, striking again, claws raking across Rex's shoulder. Blood marked the snow like spilled ink. Ethan grabbed a fallen branch and struck at the wolf's flank. "Get back!" he shouted. The wolf turned, lips curling, but another voice joined. The deep cry of Harold Jenkins, the old veteran from town, running through the trees with two men behind him. They shouted, waving sticks and shovels, their voices driving the animal back. The wolf hesitated, snarled once more, then vanished into the forest shadows. Ethan dropped to his knees beside Rex. The dog's chest rose fast, his fur matted with red at the shoulder. "Easy, boy," Ethan whispered, pressing his hands against the wound. "You did it. You kept them safe." The children stood nearby, wide-eyed and trembling. Dorothy arrived moments later, her breath ragged from running. She knelt beside them, pulling the smallest into her arms. "He saved them," she murmured, eyes glistening. "That dog just saved them all." Ethan's face was pale, his hands shaking as he tied a strip of cloth around Rex's shoulder. The blood seeped through, staining his sleeve. "Hang on, partner. Don't you quit on me." Rex's eyes met his, still steady, still brave. His tail brushed once against the snow, faint but sure. The townsfolk gathered the clearing, filled with murmurs of awe and fear. Harold placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "He's one of us now," he said softly. "Redford won't forget this." Ethan nodded, his throat too tight for words. He looked down at the snow around them. White and red mingled together like the battlefield he thought he'd left behind. As the others helped lift Rex onto a makeshift sled, Ethan kept his hand on the dog's neck, feeling the faint but steady pulse beneath the fur. "Stay with me, boy," he whispered. "You're the heart of this place." The wind swept through the pines, carrying the echoes of the fight away. Above them, the sun broke weakly through the clouds, casting a pale light across the crimson-streaked snow. They began the slow walk back toward town, Ethan limping beside the sled, Dorothy guiding the children, and the people of Redford following close behind. The forest that had once seemed quiet now felt alive, bearing witness to the courage that had unfolded within it. By the time they reached the diner, the sign above the door glowed like a beacon against the twilight. Rex lay still but breathing, his eyes flickering open at the sound of familiar voices. Ethan knelt beside him, whispering through clenched teeth. "You held the line again, partner. Just like the desert." Rex blinked once, his gaze calm, trusting. The townsfolk gathered around them in silence, the snow falling softly once more, covering the blood, but never the memory. The night after the fight blurred into motion. The people of Redford filled the diner with quiet urgency, their boots tracking snow across the floor. Dorothy moved like a commander, clearing tables and directing lights toward the back room. A local veterinarian, Dr. Hensley, arrived within the hour. A man in his 50s with gentle hands and a voice that never rose above calm. Ethan stayed beside Rex, holding him steady as the doctor worked. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the faint sweetness of coffee still lingering in the air. The bullet wound of war had long healed, but this fresh mark of bravery, cut deeper. "Good thing you brought him fast," Dr. Hensley said, stitching the wound at Rex's shoulder. "Strong dog, stronger heart." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. He's always been that way. Rex's breathing steadied as the needle moved. His tail gave one slow tap against the floor, as if reminding them he was still there, still listening. By morning, word of what happened had spread across town. The story of the German shepherd who fought off a wolf to save the children reached every house and shop. Redford moved with one shared purpose: to make sure the dog who had protected them would never want for care again. Children taped drawings to the diner's windows, Rex standing tall against snow and shadow. Someone hung a sign above the counter that read, "Our Guardian." Donations began piling up in jars, coins, bills, even a small silver chain from a local jeweler. The town had claimed Rex as one of their own. Ethan sat by his side hour after hour, his hand resting on the bandaged shoulder. The fire crackled nearby, its warmth catching the quiet glint of tears in his eyes. "You fought like you always do," he whispered, like the desert never ended. Rex opened his eyes, slow but steady. His gaze met Ethan's, and for a moment the world narrowed to the sound of breath and fire. Dorothy came over, setting a cup of coffee beside him. "He's going to pull through," she said. "Town's betting on it." Ethan smiled faintly. Then the odds are in his favor. The bell over the diner door jingled. Ethan looked up and froze. Lucas stood there, snow still clinging to his coat. Beside him were Sophie and Matthew, their eyes wide and wet. Lucas's face carried months of guilt, softened now by relief. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. "Vanessa's gone. She left. After everything. I should have stood up for you long before." Ethan rose slowly, leaning on the chair for balance. "You came a long way to say that." Lucas nodded, voice breaking. "I came to make it right." Before Ethan could answer, Sophie ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Uncle Ethan," she cried, "you and Rex are heroes. Everyone's talking about you." Matthew followed, kneeling beside Rex, whispering, "Good soldier, dog." Ethan knelt too, his eyes burning with tears he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Lucas joined them, resting a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Can you forgive me?" he asked. Ethan looked at him for a long moment, then exhaled. "I already did. You just needed to find your way here." The room filled with silence, the kind that heals instead of hurts. Dorothy stood back, her expression soft, the firelight flickering across her face. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, slow and peaceful. Inside the diner, the warmth of reunion felt almost sacred. Ethan sat back beside Rex, his hand steady over the dog's paw. "You see, partner," he murmured. "Even the lost find their way home." Rex's eyes fluttered, the faint thump of his tail echoing like a heartbeat in the quiet. The town outside buzzed with gratitude, laughter, and the kind of reverence reserved for true heroes. In that moment, Redford belonged to them all. The next morning came quiet and bright, the snow outside glistening under a pale sun. Redford moved at its usual slow rhythm, smoke curling from chimneys, shop windows glowing against the cold. Inside Mayfield's diner, warmth filled every corner. The bell above the door chimed with each familiar face that stepped in, bringing laughter stories and the smell of winter coats dusted with snow. Rex rested near the fireplace, his shoulder bandaged but healing well. Children stopped to pet him on their way to the counter, whispering their thanks as if to a guardian watching over them. Above the mantel hung a framed photo of him surrounded by the town's children, a sign below it, hand-painted in careful letters, "Our Guardian of Redford." Ethan stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the snow drift past the glass. Lucas sat nearby, talking softly with Dorothy, while Sophie and Matthew helped wipe tables with cheerful energy. It felt like a scene from a life Ethan never thought he'd have again, a life that didn't need medals or orders to mean something. Dorothy approached, handing him a slice of pie. "You've got visitors," she said, nodding toward Lucas. "He says there's a place for you back in Spokane. A veterans program, some people offering work and housing." Ethan smiled faintly. "I appreciate it," he said. Lucas looked up. "You earned a fresh start, brother. You don't have to stay here fixing roofs and chasing leaks." Ethan glanced toward Rex by the fire, the light flickering across the dog's calm face. "This feels like a fresh start to me," he said quietly. "Maybe I'm where I was meant to be." Lucas studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then I'll visit more often." "You'd better," Ethan replied, his tone gentle. As the evening settled in, the diner filled again. Locals gathered to share dinner, their laughter echoing beneath the hum of the old jukebox. The glow from the fire bathed the walls in gold, reflecting off the chrome counter and polished floors. Dorothy moved between tables with practiced ease, her smile steady and kind. Ethan sat near the hearth with Rex resting his hand on the dog's back. The steady rise and fall of Rex's breathing matched the rhythm of the town outside. Slow, peaceful, alive. Snow fell thick again, covering the street in silence. He watched the flames dance, the reflection flickering in his eyes. "We didn't run away, Rex," he said softly. "We chose freedom and found home." Rex stirred. pressing his nose against Ethan's hand before sinking back into sleep. Outside, the neon sign of Mayfield's glowed warm against the falling snow, its red and white light reflecting across the street like a small beacon in the dark. Families walked past, their laughter mixing with the soft whistle of the wind. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the peace in his chest deeper than he'd felt in years. The scars, the memories, the long miles. They had led him here to this quiet place where loyalty still meant something and love was spoken through small, steady acts of care. He looked toward the window one last time where the snow kept falling, endless, pure, and full of grace. Even when the world turns cold, he thought love and loyalty can still light the way. The fire crackled softly. Rex breathed slow beside him, and the light of Mayfield's diner glowed against the night. Steady, strong, and home. The story of Ethan and Rex is more than a tale of survival. It is a quiet reminder of the loyalty, courage, and love that animals give without question. Through every moment of loss and renewal, Rex stood as a living symbol of devotion, showing that even in the hardest winters of life, warmth can still be found in companionship. The German Shepherd, strong yet gentle, carries a heart built for service and protection, but more than that, a soul capable of deep, unwavering love. Their journey reflects what truly matters: kindness, resilience, and the ability to begin again. Ethan's road from pain to peace mirrors the way many of us must walk through storms to rediscover faith in goodness. It was Rex's loyalty that anchored him, teaching that sometimes healing doesn't come from escape, but from choosing love over fear and trust over bitterness. In Redford, the small town that welcomed them, the story of a man and his dog became something greater, a testament to how compassion builds community. The people rallied for Rex not because he was perfect, but because he was brave. In his quiet strength, they saw the best parts of themselves. May their story remind us all to care a little more. For the animals who trust us, for the people who stumble yet keep going, and for the silent bonds that make life meaningful. For in the eyes of a loyal dog, we find what humanity too often forgets, that love needs no words, only presence. When the world grows cold, may we, like Ethan and Rex, keep walking toward the light, together.